Detective Sarah Reeves stood at the edge of the immaculately manicured lawn, her eyes fixed on the sprawling suburban home before her. The flashing lights of police cruisers painted the white siding in alternating streaks of red and blue, a stark contrast to the peaceful facade of the neighborhood. "What do we have?" she asked, addressing the young officer who approached her with a notepad in hand. "Female victim, mid-60s," he replied, flipping through his notes. "Homeowner found her about an hour ago when he returned from a business trip. She's been identified as Eleanor Thompson." Sarah's brow furrowed. "Thompson? Any relation to the homeowner?" The officer nodded grimly. "His mother-in-law." As Sarah ducked under the crime scene tape and made her way towards the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case was going to be anything but straightforward. The immaculate flower beds and neatly trimmed hedges seemed to mock the tragedy that had unfolded within the walls of the picturesque home. Inside, the contrast was jarring. The living room, with its plush sofas and carefully arranged decor, looked like something out of a home and garden magazine. But the illusion of perfection was shattered by the body lying crumpled on the expensive Persian rug. Sarah approached carefully, mindful of the forensics team working around the scene. The victim, Eleanor Thompson, lay face down, her silver hair matted with blood. A heavy crystal vase, now broken and bloodied, lay nearby the apparent murder weapon. "Time of death?" Sarah asked, the medical examiner kneeling beside the body. "Preliminary estimate puts it between 9 p.m. and midnight last night," he replied without looking up. Sarah's gaze swept the room, taking in every detail. A half-empty glass of wine on the coffee table. A woman's sweater draped over the back of an armchair. Family photos on the mantel, smiling faces that had no idea their world was about to be turned upside down. One photo in particular caught her eye. It showed a younger Eleanor with a couple, presumably her daughter and son-in-law. They were laughing, arms around each other, the picture of a happy family. "Detective Reeves," a voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see a man standing in the doorway, his face pale and drawn. "I am David Thompson. This was my home, my mother-in-law." His voice trailed off as his eyes landed on the body. Sarah watched him carefully, noting the shock in his expression, but also something else, a flicker of an emotion she couldn't quite place. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "I'm very sorry for your loss. I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you a few questions. Can you tell me where you were last night?" David Thompson tore his gaze away from the crime scene, meeting Sarah's eyes. "I was out of town on business. I just got back and found..." He gestured helplessly at the scene before them. Sarah nodded, jotting down notes. "And your wife? Where is she?" A strange look passed over David's face. Guilt? Fear. It was gone so quickly, Sarah wasn't sure she'd seen it at all. "She's away," he said after a moment's hesitation, "visiting her sister in Florida. She left 3 days ago." As Sarah continued her questioning, she couldn't shake the feeling that David Thompson was holding something back. The pieces didn't quite fit a mother-in-law alone in her daughter's home, a husband returning from a convenient business trip, a wife conveniently out of town. Little did she know, she was standing at the threshold of a case that would unravel a web of secrets, lies, and forbidden passions, a case that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, family, and the depths of human desire. As she left the Thompson residence hours later, Sarah Reeves was certain of only one thing. This was just the beginning, and the truth, whatever it might be, was going to shock this quiet suburban community to its core. Detective Sarah Reeves sat at her desk, staring at the crime scene photos spread before her. Eleanor Thompson's lifeless eyes stared back, a stark reminder of the brutality of the crime. Sarah rubbed her temples, trying to piece together the puzzle. Her phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. It was a text from her partner, Detective Mike Callahan. Got something. Meet me at the station ASAP. 20 minutes later, Sarah walked into the precinct to find Mike poring over a stack of financial records. What have you got? She asked, peering over his shoulder. Mike looked up, his eyes gleaming with the excitement of a new lead. I've been going through David Thompson's financials. Guy's been withdrawing large sums of cash over the past 6 months. We're talking thousands of dollars, Sarah. Sarah's brow furrowed. Affair money? Could be, Mike nodded. But here's where it gets interesting. I cross-referenced the withdrawal dates with Eleanor Thompson's bank records. On several occasions, she made large deposits the day after David's withdrawals. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Are you saying David was paying his mother-in-law for something? Mike shrugged. Could be blackmail. Could be something else entirely. But it's definitely not normal. As they discussed the implications, a young officer knocked on the door. Detectives, we've got David Thompson in interview room 1. He says he has more information about the night of the murder. Sarah and Mike exchanged glances. Let's see what he has to say, Sarah said, gathering her notes. In the sterile confines of the interview room, David Thompson looked a shell of the man Sarah had met at the crime scene. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair disheveled. Mr. Thompson, Sarah began, you said you had more information for us? David nodded, his hands trembling slightly. I wasn't entirely truthful before, about where I was, the night Eleanor died. Sarah leaned forward, her interest piqued. Go on. I wasn't out of town, David confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. I was at a motel, the Pinewood, just off Route 7. Were you alone, Mr. Thompson? Mike asked, his pen poised above his notepad. David's eyes darted between the two detectives. No, he finally admitted. I was with someone. A woman. Sarah kept her face neutral, even as her mind raced. Does this woman have a name? David hesitated, then seemed to deflate. Vanessa Carter. She's my wife's best friend. The revelation hung in the air, heavy with implications. Sarah pressed on. How long has this been going on, Mr. Thompson? About 8 months, David replied, his voice thick with shame. It started at a Christmas party. We were both drunk, and as David continued his confession, Sarah's mind was already connecting the dots. The affair, the secret payments to Eleanor, the convenient alibi that had now crumbled. But something still didn't add up. Mr. Thompson, she interrupted, these payments to your mother-in-law. Were they blackmail? Did she know about the affair? David's head snapped up, confusion evident on his face. Payments? What payments? Sarah and Mike exchanged glances. Either David was an exceptional actor, or he genuinely had no idea about the financial transactions between him and Eleanor. We have records of large cash withdrawals from your account, Mike explained, followed by deposits of similar amounts into Eleanor's account. Over a period of 6 months. The color drained from David's face. That's impossible. I never gave Eleanor any money. Unless, his voice trailed off, his eyes widening with a sudden realization. Unless what, Mr. Thompson? Sarah prodded. David looked up, his expression a mix of disbelief and dawning horror. Unless it wasn't Eleanor making those deposits. It was my wife, Karen. She has access to her mother's accounts. She handles all of Eleanor's finances. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they painted a picture more complex and disturbing than Sarah had initially imagined. If Karen Thompson was involved, where was she now? And what was her role in this twisted family drama? As David Thompson buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by the weight of his confessions and the new questions they raised, Sarah knew they were only scratching the surface of this case. She stood up, her mind already racing ahead to the next steps of the investigation. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Thompson. We'll be in touch if we have any more questions. In the meantime, don't leave town." Leaving the interview room, Sarah turned to Mike. "We need to find Karen Thompson, now." As they walked briskly towards their desks, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of uncovering a truth far more shocking than a simple affair. The threads of this case were tangled in ways she had yet to fully comprehend, and she had a sinking feeling that before this was over, more blood would be spilled. The hunt for Karen Thompson was on, and with it, the race to prevent another tragedy in this already devastating family saga. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Detective Sarah Reeves pulled into the driveway of the Thompson residence. The crime scene tape still fluttered in the breeze, a grim reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded here. Sarah's partner, Mike Callahan, was already waiting, a steaming cup of coffee in each hand. He passed one to Sarah as she approached. "Thanks," she murmured, taking a grateful sip. "Any sign of Karen?" Mike shook his head. "Nothing yet. Her cell phone's been off before the murder. Credit cards haven't been used. It's like she's vanished into thin air." Sarah frowned. "What about the sister in Florida?" "I spoke with her last night," Mike replied. "Says she hasn't seen or heard from Karen in months. The whole visiting her sister story was a lie. They made their way into the house, careful not to disturb any potential evidence. The living room, where Eleanor's body had been found, was still sealed off." Sarah's eyes were drawn to the family photos on the mantel's smiling faces that now seemed to mock the grim reality of their situation. "Let's start with Karen's bedroom," Sarah suggested. "There might be something there to indicate where she's gone." The master bedroom was immaculate, almost unnaturally so. Everything was in its place, as if the room had been staged for a real estate showing rather than lived in. "It's too perfect," Mike muttered, echoing Sarah's thoughts. They began a methodical search. Sarah opened the closet, noting the carefully organized rows of clothes. "Look at this," she called to Mike. "There are gaps in the clothing. Specific items missing." Mike joined her, his eyes scanning the closet. "You're right. And look here." He pointed to an empty space on the shoe rack. "Hiking boots, maybe?" Sarah nodded. She packed, but where was she going? As they continued their search, a glint of metal caught Sarah's eye. Tucked behind a stack of sweaters was a small safe. "Mike, give me a hand with this," she said, pulling the safe out. It took them a few minutes to crack it open, but when they did, both detectives fell silent. Inside was a stack of papers, bank statements, emails, and what looked like surveillance photos. Sarah picked up one of the photos. It showed David Thompson and a woman she didn't recognize, presumably Vanessa Carter, embracing outside a motel. "She knew," Sarah breathed. "Karen knew about the affair." Mike was leafing through the bank statements. "These match the withdrawals and deposits we found. Karen was taking money from David's account and putting it into her mother's." "But why?" Sarah mused. "Blackmail doesn't make sense if she was the one moving the money." As they dug deeper, a pattern began to emerge. Emails between Karen and Eleanor revealed a complex web of deceit and manipulation. "Look at this," Mike said, holding up a printed email. "It's from Karen to Eleanor. She's talking about taking care of David and making sure he pays for what he's done. This is dated just 3 days before the murder." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" Mike nodded grimly. Karen set this whole thing up. She knew about the affair. She was siphoning money from David, and it looks like she was planning something with her mother. But then why kill Eleanor? Sarah wondered aloud. Before Mike could respond, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a text from the precinct. Facial recognition hit on Karen Thompson. Security camera at bus station in Denver, Colorado. Time stamp 6 hours ago. Sarah looked up at Mike, her eyes wide. She's running. Within minutes, they were back in Sarah's car, sirens blaring as they raced towards the precinct. As Mike called in to arrange for cooperation, with the Denver PD, Sarah's mind was racing. The case had just blown wide open. What had started as an apparent crime of passion was revealing itself to be something far more calculated and complex. Karen Thompson was no longer just a missing person. She was now their prime suspect. As the city streets blurred past them, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were only scratching the surface of this twisted family drama. What other secrets would they uncover? And more importantly, could they find Karen before she disappeared for good or worse, struck again? The hunt was on, and the clock was ticking. Little did Sarah know, the true, shocking revelations were yet to come, waiting to be unraveled in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. The plane touched down at Denver International Airport with a jolt, snapping Detective Sarah Reeves out of her uneasy slumber. Beside her, Mike Callahan was already gathering their materials, his face set with determination. Denver PD is meeting us at baggage claim, he informed her as they disembarked. They've got a lead on Karen's movements since the bus station sighting. Sarah nodded, her mind racing. 5-hour flight had given her time to review the case files, but the more she learned, the less sense it all made. Why would Karen kill her own mother? And if she had planned this elaborate scheme with Eleanor, what had gone wrong? At baggage claim, they were met by Detective Louis Ortiz of the Denver PD, a stocky man with a no-nonsense demeanor. "We've got a possible location," Ortiz said without preamble. "A motel on the outskirts of the city. Manager recognized Karen from the photo we circulated. Says she checked in last night, paid cash." Within minutes, they were in an unmarked police car, speeding through the Denver streets. As they drove, Sarah's phone buzzed with a new email. It was from their tech team back home. "Mike, look at this," she said, angling the phone towards him. They've managed to recover some deleted emails from Karen's cloud account. It's correspondence with someone named J. Martinez. Listen to this. Everything's set. David took the bait, just like we knew he would. Mom's on board, though she doesn't know the full plan. Once this is over, we'll have everything we need. Meet me at the usual place on the 15th there. Mike whistled low. Looks like we've got another player in this game. Any idea who J. Martinez might be? Sarah shook her head. No hits in our database. Ortiz, can you run it through yours? As Ortiz made the call, Sarah's mind was whirling. The pieces were there, but they still weren't fitting together quite right. They pulled up to the Blue Pine Motel just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the nearly empty parking lot. A lone car sat in front of room 12, a rental, according to the plates. That's gotta be her, Mike muttered as they approached the room, hands hovering near their weapons. Sarah nodded to Ortiz, who pounded on the door. Denver PD. Open up. With a nod from Ortiz, Mike kicked in the door. They rushed in, weapons drawn, only to find nothing. The room was empty, but signs of a hasty departure were everywhere. Drawers hung open, clothes strewn about. On the bed lay an open laptop. She must have bolted when she saw us pull up, Ortiz growled, already calling for backup to search the area. Sarah approached the laptop cautiously. The screen was open to an email inbox Karen's. And at the top was a new message, sent just minutes ago. If you're reading this, something's gone wrong. I don't have much time. They're close, too close. I never meant for Mom to die. That wasn't part of the plan. David was supposed to be the one, but Mom found out. She threatened to expose everything. I had no choice. I'm sorry for dragging you into this. The money is where we agreed. Use it to start the life we dreamed of. I'll find you when I can. All my love. Karen. Sarah read the email aloud, her voice tinged with disbelief. She's confessing to the murder, but... She trailed off, her brow furrowed. But it sounds like it wasn't premeditated, Mike finished for her. And who the hell is Jay? As if in answer, a notification popped up on the laptop. A new email from Jay. Martinez, don't do anything rash. I'm closer than you think. Stay put. I am coming for you. The detectives exchanged glances. Ortiz, Sarah said urgently. We need to lock down this area now. Karen's still here, and she's got an accomplice on the way. As Ortiz barked orders into his radio, Sarah's gaze was drawn to the window. In the distance, the Rocky Mountains loomed, their peaks shrouded in the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there, Karen Thompson was on the run, carrying with her the answers to this twisted mystery. And somewhere, this enigmatic Jay was racing towards her, adding yet another volatile element to an already explosive situation. Sarah's jaw set with determination. They were close, so close to unraveling this web of deceit and murder. But as the sun dipped below the mountains, casting the motel in deep shadows, she couldn't shake the feeling that the most dangerous part of this hunt was yet to come. In the distance, a car engine roared to life, then faded into the night. The game was far from over. The night air was crisp and thin as Detective Sarah Reeves maneuvered her borrowed police cruiser along the winding mountain roads. Beside her, Mike Callahan pored over a map, his flashlight casting eerie shadows across the dashboard. The park ranger said he spotted a woman, matching Karen's description, heading up Elk Creek Trail about an hour ago, Mike said, tracing the path with his finger. If we hurry, we might be able to cut her off at Beaver Lake. Sarah nodded grimly, pressing down on the accelerator. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating towering pines and sheer rock faces. Somewhere out there, Karen Thompson was on the run, and the mysterious Jay. Martinez was closing in. As they rounded a sharp bend, Sarah's radio crackled to life. It was Detective Ortiz, back at the command post. Reeves, we've got something on Jay. Martinez? His voice came through, tinged with static. Full name is Javier Martinez. Ex-military, discharged under questionable circumstances 3 years ago. Since then, he's been off the grid, but we found a connection. He and Karen Thompson were in the same unit during a tour in Afghanistan. Sarah and Mike exchanged glances. That explains the trust between them, Mike mused. But how does this tie into the murder and the money? Before Sarah could respond, a flash of movement caught her eye. A figure darted across the road ahead, illuminated for a split second in the headlights before disappearing into the trees. There! Sarah shouted, slamming on the brakes. Car skidded to a halt, and both detectives were out in an instant, flashlights scanning the dense undergrowth. Denver PD. Stop where you are, Mike bellowed into the darkness. For a moment, all was silent. Then, a rustle of leaves, followed by the sound of running feet. Sarah plunged into the forest, Mike close behind. Branches whipped at their faces as they gave chase, the beam of their flashlights bouncing wildly through the trees. Suddenly, they burst into a small clearing. There, illuminated in their flashlight beams, stood a man tall, athletic, with close-cropped dark hair and the bearing of a soldier. "Javier Martinez," Sarah said, her gun trained on him. "Don't move." Martinez raised his hand slowly, his face a mask of calm. "Detectives," he said, his voice steady. "I suppose it was only a matter of time." As Mike moved to cuff him, Sarah's eyes scanned the clearing. "Where's Karen?" she demanded. A small smile played at the corners of Martinez's mouth. "Karen, I'm afraid you're a step behind, detective." "Always a step behind." Before Sarah could press further, Mike's voice cut through the tension. "Sarah, look at this." He was holding up Martinez's backpack, which had fallen during the chase. From it, he pulled out a laptop and a thick envelope. Sarah's breath caught as Mike opened the envelope, revealing stacks of $100 bills. "The money from David's account," she breathed. Martinez's smile faded. "You don't understand," he said, an edge of desperation creeping into his voice. "None of this was supposed to happen. It was just supposed to be a simple extraction." Sarah's brow furrowed. "Extraction? What are you talking about?" Martinez sighed heavily. "Karen and I, we saw things during our tour. Things that certain people would prefer stayed buried. We were going to expose it all, but we needed resources, protection. The plan with David, it was just meant to secure funds for our operation. Eleanor wasn't supposed to get involved." As Martinez spoke, Sarah's mind raced. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but something still didn't add up. If this was about exposing military secrets, why the elaborate scheme with David? Why not just come forward? Martinez's laugh was bitter. "You're naive, detective. The people we're dealing with, they don't play by the rules. We needed leverage, insurance. The affair, the money. It was all part of building our case." A twig snapped in the darkness beyond the clearing. All three heads turned towards the sound. For a moment, Sarah could have sworn she saw a flash of movement, a familiar silhouette. "Karen," she called out, taking a step towards the trees. Suddenly, a shot rang out, echoing through the mountains. Martinez crumpled to the ground, blood blossoming on his chest. Sarah and Mike dove for cover, guns drawn. "Karen!" Sarah shouted into the night. "It's over. Come out now." But only silence answered. As Mike called for backup and attended to the wounded Martinez, Sarah stared into the impenetrable darkness of the forest. Karen was out there, desperate and dangerous. And now, with Martinez down, she was the only one left who knew the full truth. As the wail of approaching sirens began to echo through the valley, Sarah knew that this night was far from over. The real challenge was just beginning, and the secrets buried in these mountains were deeper and darker than she had ever imagined. The hunt continued, but now the stakes were higher than ever. Somewhere in the vast wilderness, Karen Thompson was fighting not just for her freedom, but for a truth that powerful forces wanted to keep hidden. And Sarah was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost.